Not always does silence mean peace. Sometimes it conceals the last truth of someone who was never heard. She fell to the ground, powerless, her eyes fixed on some point on the ceiling. Her breath was weak, fragmented. Blood dripped slowly down the side of her face. In her final seconds of life, when everything around seemed to collapse in silence, she whispered something. A short phrase, soft, incomplete, but with the weight of a deadly secret, something that, if understood there and then, could have changed everything. But no one understood. No one knew what to do with those broken words. And, like so many other truths, that whisper was buried with her. Have you ever thought about how many clues may have been ignored in the heat of a critical moment? How many victims, in their last moments, tried to tell us something important, but were silenced by their own despair, pain, or the haste of those around? This is the kind of mystery that haunts us, an enigma that does not end when life does, but begins to echo even louder in the silence of death. Stay with me until the end, because what you are about to discover may surprise you. The crime happened on a seemingly ordinary night. There were no signs of forced entry. No neighbors heard screams. No camera recorded suspicious entries or exits. But something didn't make sense from the start. The victim, a young woman known for being reserved, left a warning that almost no one noticed. The only witness to her own death was herself, and in the end, all she managed to leave was that whisper, so subtle that it almost went unnoticed, so important that it might have been the only key to revealing the true perpetrator of the crime. When the paramedics arrived, she was still conscious. She murmured softly, as if trying to hold on to a memory, a name, or perhaps a revelation. A police officer approached and noted what he thought he had heard, but the sound was too weak, the diction already compromised, and no one there, not even the specialists who came later, could decipher with certainty what had been said. Was it a name, a place, a warning? From that point, the case plunged into a murky territory where criminal psychology intertwines with the limits of human language under extreme stress. Have you ever gone through this? Have you ever tried to say something important and felt that no one was listening? This video dives deep into this kind of silence. Not the common silence, but the silence that screams, that hides truths, that pleads to be understood. The psychology of trauma shows us that the brain, in its final moments, tries to condense memories, sensations, and secrets into quick words. But when these words are not understood, what remains is a trail of questions that may never be answered, and that's exactly what makes this case so disturbing. In the next few minutes, you will learn the complete story behind this whisper. You will understand why it was ignored, who had an interest in keeping this secret buried, and how a single phrase spoken between life and death could contain the truth that no one has ever been able to prove, and perhaps, just perhaps, you will start to see how many other deadly secrets are around us, waiting to be heard. But before anything else, we need to go back to the beginning of that night, because the truth, even when whispered, always leaves traces. And it is in those traces that we will begin to search now. We return to that scene, the dimly lit room, the muffled sound of the paramedic's footsteps, the metallic smell in the air. Everything stopped for a few seconds when she tried to speak. An almost invisible effort, but one that carried a gigantic weight. The nurse said that she heard a word. The officer thought it was another. The family believes it was someone's name, and perhaps everyone was right. Or perhaps no one. This is the kind of moment that forces us to look at the details, at the fragments that go unnoticed, when we rush to understand only the obvious. And this is where I want to extend a sincere invitation to you. If this topic resonates with you, if you've ever been troubled by how many truths may have been silenced at the very moment they mattered most, leave your thoughts in the comments about what has touched you so far. It could be a feeling, a memory, or just what you think that lost phrase might mean. Your insight could open a new point of reflection for everyone here, and that is exactly what transforms this space into something alive, real, and collective. Like the video if it made you think. This isn't just a click. It's a way to say, this conversation needs to continue. And if you feel that this type of content holds value, if it helps you see the human side of criminal psychology, if it ignites a desire in you to dive even deeper into these mysteries that no one dares to explain, then subscribe to the channel. Really, your presence here makes all the difference. It gives us the strength to continue investigating, producing, telling stories that deserve to be heard, even when they were spoken in a whisper. Now, imagine that whisper was, in fact, a last attempt to reveal something that had been hidden for a long time. A secret buried not just with the victim, but with everyone who chose not to listen. Because when the truth is ignored, silence becomes complicit. And that is where our true search begins. The street was calm that night. There was no unusual movement, no suspicious cars, no fights or noises to draw attention. The neighborhood was asleep, just like any other weekday. But inside that house, something out of the script was happening. The lights were off. The front door ajar, no signs of an apparent struggle. Nothing broken, nothing out of place. It was as if someone had entered and exited without leaving footprints, without raising the slightest alarm. The most disconcerting thing was precisely this: the silence. A calculated, strategic silence. Whoever committed that crime knew exactly what they were doing. They knew they couldn't leave traces, that every move had to be precise. And it was. The forensic examination confirmed there were no signs of forced entry. No fingerprints out of place, no camera in the vicinity captured anything unusual. Even the victim's phone was found turned off, with no recent messages, as if everything had been erased or had never been recorded. It is in this type of scenario that the investigation complicates. Because when there are no witnesses, the only one who could tell what happened is the one who is no longer here. And what remained was that whisper, the only piece that could crumble this meticulously constructed plan. But it came too late, or too early, for those who were not ready to hear. The detectives knew something was off. The victim's behavior in the days leading up to it, the way the crime scene was too clean, and especially the fact that there were no indications of a defensive struggle. How does someone enter a house, take a life, and exit without raising any suspicion? This is not a crime of impulse, it is a cold decision, an execution with a script, and that's why this case is so unsettling. Because it exposes how control can be a potent weapon in the wrong hands. Whoever did this didn't just commit murder. They controlled the narrative, they silenced the facts, they planned the impact. It's as if the true crime was not the death itself, but the intentional construction of the silence around it. A silence that protects, that hides, that lies. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because understanding the behind the scenes of that night is more than just seeking culprits. It's diving into the mindset of someone who manipulates everything to seem natural, who calculates the absence of evidence as part of their plan, and who bets on a hidden truth concealed among the details that almost no one notices. What is most disturbing about this case is not only the absence of material evidence, it is what was said. What, for an instant, everyone heard, but no one understood. The whisper, that phrase slipping from the victim's lips while her life was fading. There was urgency in her voice. It wasn't a lament, nor a farewell. It was something that needed to be heard. As if, even in shock, her body knew there was something crucial there, something that couldn't die with her. But it did. Witnesses reported different versions. The nurse said the word seemed to be door. The officer swore he heard he. A family member, in despair, thought it was 7. But none of these words made sense in isolation. Together, they created even more confusion. And thus began the first crack in the case. Everyone heard, but no one had the courage to assert with certainty. Was it a name, a location, an attempt at confession, or a last denunciation? Perhaps it was a code, or a detail so intimate that only someone who knew her deeply would be capable of deciphering. This is the type of moment that reveals how cruel time can be. Because when the truth depends on seconds, and those seconds pass, everything transforms, and what could have been a clear clue becomes an agonizing enigma. That phrase, spoken on the edge of life and death, carried a hidden meaning. A last effort from someone who knew they wouldn't have another chance. And yet the moment was lost, or rather neglected, because the system is not prepared to listen to fragments. It wants full sentences, firm evidence, ready certainties. But the human mind doesn't work that way, especially in extreme situations. The psychology of trauma shows that when the body collapses, the brain clings to what matters most. It tries to warn, it tries to leave something. It's almost an instinctive reaction of symbolic survival, a desperate attempt to remain present even after everything is over. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. What if what she said was a name, a childhood nickname, a place she frequented with someone that no one suspects? What if that single word had the power to dismantle the entire official narrative of the case? The hardest part in these situations isn't just listening, it's interpreting, because what's at stake is not just language, it's pain, it's loss. It's the desperation trying to translate itself into words when there's no more time left. And we need to look at this with more sensitivity, with the courage to see the failures in the process, the decisions that were not made, the opportunities that were buried along with that voice. Comment below. I would have listened, just so I know that you feel the weight of this hidden truth too. She was not someone easy to read. Discreet, methodical. One of those people who seem to carry the world in silence but almost never allow their real feelings to show. She worked in a pharmaceutical laboratory, spending much of the day isolated in analyses, reports, and formulas. Few knew exactly what she dealt with, and even fewer knew what was going on inside her. Neighbors said she was polite but distant. Colleagues at work said she was brilliant but introspective. As for her closest friends, they told a very different story. There was something about her that gave the impression she was always on alert, as if she were expecting something, as if she carried a constant tension on her shoulders. A friend reported that weeks before the crime, she seemed more nervous than usual. She would frequently look over her shoulder, locked doors that she refused to leave ajar, and avoided going out alone at night. When questioned, she smiled and changed the subject. She said it was just tiredness. But those who pay close attention can sense when fear is closer than it appears. This leads us to an uncomfortable question. Did she know? Did she on some level foresee what was coming? This hypothesis changes everything, because it transforms a victim into someone who tried in some way to protect herself, someone who may have left clues, signs, subtle alerts. And perhaps no one noticed because we haven't been trained for this, to read between the lines, to understand that human behavior is not linear, that a change in routine could be a camouflaged cry for help. She had a troubled childhood. She lost her father early and grew up with a mother who faced mental health issues. From a young age, she developed a mindset of control. She wanted to predict everything, to have mastery over every detail. This need for stability shaped her way of relating to the world. Few friends, almost no romantic partners, but a lot of dedication to her work. That was where she felt safe. That was where she controlled the variables, until apparently something slipped out of control. And what was predictable turned into noise. Because when we start to profile someone's psychology, we're not just understanding the victim, we're revealing a broader scenario. The type of environment she lived in, the people around her, the decisions she made, the signals she emitted. All of this is part of a journey, a sequence of moments that, when added together, can reveal a hidden truth. Perhaps if we had looked more closely, the phrase uttered by her would not have been a mystery. It would have been the confirmation of something that had been there all along, but no one had the courage to face. He didn't cry at the funeral. He didn't even seem shaken. He looked at the coffin as one would observe a painting in a gallery, distant, curious, without real emotion. Some noticed, others preferred not to comment, but it was impossible to ignore the way he occupied the space, too firm, too calm, as if he already knew that nothing would affect him. He was close to the victim, very close. He knew her habits, where she kept her keys, how she thought, who she talked to, and yet during the interrogation, he said he knew very little. All he could respond with were short, measured phrases, almost rehearsed, like someone playing chess instead of telling the truth. His name had been on the police radar since the beginning. But it was also surrounded by a kind of informal shield. He was a respected man, had influential friends, no criminal record, knew how to behave, and most importantly, knew how to stay silent. A cold, strategic silence. While the victim, at the peak of vulnerability, tried to leave a message to the world, he remained resolutely quiet. That alone carries a weight that words cannot reach. Because sometimes what screams the loudest in an investigation is precisely those who say nothing. The most intriguing part is that he knew things that could never be public, details about her day-to-day life that were not included in any reports, alternative routes to work, names of old colleagues she rarely mentioned, nighttime habits she avoided sharing. The closeness between them was real. But there was always something unsettling about that relationship, a veiled control, a feeling that he knew more about her than he should and used that knowledge with a frightening calmness. This type of psychological profile is more common than one might think. People who navigate relationships steeped in emotional domination, subtle manipulation and power games. They are the ones who go unnoticed due to a lack of evidence, but leave traces in the victim's behavioral changes. He was the kind of person who never errs in words, but misses in the silence between them. And this, for those who understand, the behind the scenes of human behavior, is noise too loud to ignore. Because understanding this silence, the silence more suspicious than any scream, can completely change the perspective of everything. That's where the transformation of the investigation lies. When we stop looking only for external evidence and begin to observe the seemingly innocuous behavior that reveals a cold, tactical, almost rehearsed mindset. When the calculated discourse meets the vulnerability of a whisper, the hidden truth begins to take shape. And the impact of this can be much greater than one might imagine. There was a moment in the investigation when everything could have taken a different path. A specific, almost subtle detail caught the attention of two agents. They believed that the victim's whisper was not a delusion, nor a random act of desperation, but rather a conscious clue, a final attempt to reveal something essential. These investigators raised a hypothesis. What if that spoken word was a coded name, an intimate reference, something that only someone very close to her would understand? The theory made sense, especially considering the victim's emotional history and her chronic need for control over her own narrative. But that line of inquiry was quickly abandoned. Internal pressures, excessive bureaucracy, and the urgency to present more concrete results stifled the subjective investigation. There was no time to decode metaphors, and as often happens, they opted to take the safer, more documentable route. The theory was filed away, treated as speculation. Those who insisted on it were reassigned to other sectors. One of them even reported years later that this case haunted him, not for what he uncovered, but for what he was prevented from exploring. This is not uncommon. Cases where the hidden truth was there, clear to those who knew how to look in a non-linear way, but was set aside due to operational decisions. There's even a term for this in investigative psychology: selective blindness. When the investigation focuses so much on concrete elements that it loses sensitivity to emotional signals, symbolic languages, or gestures that reveal much more than they seem. The problem is that many times the solution to a crime is not in what is said, but in how it is said. Or, as in this case, in what was whispered. That weak phrase uttered on the brink between lucidity and the end could have been the turning point. A point of transformation that would alter the entire logic of the inquiry. But it required time, active listening, empathy. And the system, unfortunately, does not always allow for that kind of listening. Now I want to dive even deeper into this topic, because when we ignore a clue for not knowing how to interpret it, the failure is not just technical, it's human. It's a decision that impacts families, interrupts journeys, constructs distorted versions of reality. And that's where the most important revelations hide, in what was set aside, in what no one had the courage to investigate to the end. Understanding. This omission is essential to see how many times the silence is not with the victim, but with those who choose not to listen to her. Comment below, Maybe it was there all along. Just so I know that you also perceive how certain details, when ignored, change everything. In extreme contexts, the body tries to speak even when the voice fails. This is what experts call the language of trauma, a raw symbolic communication, sometimes almost indecipherable, that emerges when the brain can no longer organize thoughts clearly. Instead of complete sentences, fragments arise. Loose words, but loaded with emotional significance. For the untrained ear, it seems confusing, but for those who understand the intricacies of human behavior in shock, these fragments are maps. They point out pathways. They give clues about what the victim's mind was trying to reveal before the body gave up. In this case, the whisper was no exception. It followed a pattern that forensic psychologists know well. When physical pain mixes with intense fear, the brain resorts to shortcuts. There's no time for narratives, only for symbols. It could be the name of a street, a memory encoded in a single word, an expression that refers to a place, a person, or even a past trauma that connected directly to that situation. That's why the work of these professionals is almost like that of translators. They're not just listening to words, they are interpreting emotions condensed in sounds. There are studies showing that, under the effect of trauma, the brain activates areas linked to instinctual survival and not to rational language. This explains why many victims in critical condition say things that seem disjointed. However, when carefully analyzed, these words reveal hidden decisions, old fears, and even the name of someone who may have caused their suffering. The challenge is precisely that, to have the sensitivity to understand that what seems random may actually be the key to transforming the entire case. When we start to see what lies behind what was said unclearly, we realize that trauma not only distorts language, it redefines the way of existing in the last seconds, and that changes everything. It changes the way we investigate, how we relate to the facts, how we piece together the puzzle with pieces that at first glance seem to not fit. The impact of this goes beyond justice. It reaches the hidden truth that was concealed in the fragility of a voice. Years passed. The case was no longer making headlines, nor was it a topic of debate among specialists. The victim's memory was gradually shelved along with the legal documents, marked as without a definitive solution. But like many unfinished stories, something resurfaced from the silence, a detail that until then seemed non-existent. A box forgotten at the back of an old closet during the sale of the victim's mother's house. Inside, among personal items and childhood photos, there was a small, portable recorder. She had used it during her college years to capture thoughts, reminders, and ideas. No one expected there to be anything relevant inside, but when one of the tapes was digitized, a recording caught attention. Her voice, clear, distinct, commenting on something that seemed mundane, but that changes tone in the middle of the audio. She talks about feeling watched, mentions a name, the same one some said they heard or believed they heard in the final whisper. She doesn't directly say she is scared, but she talks about control and psychological pressure. She quotes phrases that, now with context, sound like disguised alerts. The material was accidentally delivered to the authorities by a niece who found it curious to hear her aunt speaking about something so different from her usual behavior. When the audio was analyzed, the expressions used matched patterns of language from victims under emotional manipulation. The recording, even though it was old, added a new layer to the investigation. She had been trying to send signals, and perhaps that whisper was just the last piece of a sequence of attempts that no one knew how to interpret, because this fictional, but plausible, twist shows how some revelations don't come at the expected time. They surface when we least expect them, and this says a lot about how we deal with traces of the past. When a case is archived, it doesn't mean it has been emotionally closed. For those who were close to the victim, those who carried doubts, those who still feel that something has not been explained, any new information has the power to reopen wounds or finally start to heal them. The impact of these late discoveries is brutal. They show that hidden truth can resist time, but demands a high price for having been ignored. Comment below. The pieces began to fit together. Just to know that you also felt the weight of this possible turn in the story. What makes this case even more unsettling is realizing that it is not an isolated exception. History is full of situations in which victims tried, in some way, to leave a final message and were not heard. One of the most emblematic cases is that of Elisa Lam, found dead in a water reservoir atop a hotel in Los Angeles. Before disappearing, security cameras recorded strange behaviors in the elevator, confusing gestures as if she were trying to protect herself from someone who wasn't visible in the footage. To this day, many believe there was a message there, a non-verbal plea for help, but no one could interpret it accurately. Another echoing example is that of Meredith Kircher, a student murdered in Italy. During the trial, a note written by her days before the crime emerged. The content seemed banal at first glance, but over time it took on another reading, as if there were a subtle attempt to express discomfort, to indicate that something was out of place. The same feeling appears in voice recordings left by victims of femicide, who report insecurities, abrupt changes in partners' behavior, veiled threats, but only gain real significance when the outcome is already too tragic to reverse. These cases, like the one we are following now, reveal a painful pattern. Truth, when not stated explicitly, is often ignored, and this exposes a huge fragility in how we listen to others. We are not prepared to interpret silences, glances, hesitations. We expect objective evidence, direct statements, obvious signals. But real life rarely offers that, especially when fear silences, when trauma distorts, when danger lurks beside us and disguises itself as routine. When we start to connect these stories, we realize there is something greater at play. It's not just about failures in investigations, but about failures in human listening, about the urgency to learn to read the backstage of behavior. The hidden truth does not always reveal itself in screams. Sometimes it resides in an interrupted gesture, in a cut-off sentence, in a forgotten note. And our ability to recognize that may be the only difference between justice and permanent silence. Come back with me to that scene. The room, the wounded body, the eyes that still tried to ask for help, or perhaps to say goodbye. And then, the whisper, a single word or maybe half of one, something that slipped past the lips in a final effort of someone who knew time was running out. The whole truth could not fit there, but a piece of it tried to resist, and that piece was heard, but not listened to. It hung in the air for a few seconds, found distracted ears, minds too busy maintaining protocol, and then got lost, like a key thrown in a dark room. This is the part that is most bothersome. It wasn't the lack of the right word. It was the absence of sensitivity to understand that there was more than sound there. There was intention. There was urgency. There was a story trying to conclude, and we as a society failed to give space for that. The hidden truth was there, vibrating in the air, caught between fear and lucidity. And yet, no one had the courage to pause and ask, what does this really mean? Perhaps if we had truly listened, the outcome would have been different. Perhaps the suspect would not have escaped. Perhaps justice would not just be an archived formality. Perhaps the family would sleep a little more peacefully. But that perhaps hurts, because it carries the weight of collective omission. The silence of the innocent is not just what keeps quiet. It is what echoes, what continues vibrating in the absence of questions, in the rush to close a case, in the fear of looking too deeply at an open wound. Because it's not just about her, it's about all the cases that cross our paths daily and that we do not see. It's about co-workers who change their gaze and no one notices. It's about family members who drift away in silence and no one asks why. It's about the small alerts the world emits that we have learned to ignore. The impact of this behavior is greater than one might imagine. It doesn't just erase voices, it distorts the endings of stories that were not yet ready to finish. And transformation begins when we allow ourselves to listen differently, when we choose to read the backstage, decipher the unspoken, give space to what seems small but carries an entire revelation. If you're still here, it's because this touched you in some way. Perhaps because you have also felt that something important went unnoticed, or because you understand, just like I do, that listening goes far beyond hearing sounds. It's about presence, connection, responsibility. And if this video brought you this reflection, if it made sense to you at some point in this journey, take a moment to subscribe here to the channel. We talk about themes that stir what goes beyond the surface, always with this sincere and unrushed exchange. Leave your comment saying, "I'm with you until the end." That way, I will know you were here, fully, following every detail of this story. And if you feel that this content engaged you, give it a like too. Not out of obligation, but because it shows me that it's worth continuing to bring this kind of conversation. This connection that we have created here, it matters. A playlist is now appearing complete with other stories. But now, if you want to know about a man who died under a false name, check out this other video here, because this story might also surprise you.